And I will now turn it over to Jacob Payne, Principal Planner with the City of Tempe.
Thanks, Shauna. So again, my name is Jacob Payne. I'm a principal planner with the City of Tempe's Community Development Department. And today I'll be giving about a 10-15-minute presentation introducing the idea of a future zoning code text amendment that the City of Tempe will be working on in relation to a new statute that was passed by the state legislature. It's known as the Middle Housing Bill, or House Bill 2721. So today I'll be giving you a highlight about what that House bill is and what it requires that municipalities do. And then we'll talk a little bit about our adoption timeline for this particular code text amendment, and then we'll open it up for comments, discussion, and questions. So a highlight of what the Middle Housing Bill is. So this bill was one of a number of relating to housing that were passed last session in the Arizona State Legislature. Just like those other bills, there's an implicit purpose that this is in response to the housing crisis, and it looks to expand housing supply by allowing more units on single-family zoned property in close proximity to downtown areas within the state. It's also to try and streamline the permitting and review process for multifamily developments, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So what the House Bill 2721 requires is that any municipality in the state of more than 75,000 people, so that includes City of Tempe, shall allow duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhomes on the following two types of land in the city. So that first section, which is probably for us the more consequential one, is all lots that are zoned for single-family residential within 1 mile of the central business district. And that's a defined term that we'll go into a little bit or later in the slides, but generally what the central business district is referring to is whatever we've established as our downtown area. The provisions of this law also will apply to at least 20% of any new development of more than 10 contiguous acres. So being in Tempe, a landlocked city, there's not a lot of vacant developable land in that size, but there certainly is possible, and this would be something that would also be applicable for the middle housing rule. So as I mentioned, we're talking about the area surrounding the central business district within 1 mile of that area. So for the purposes of this bill, the central business district is that area that is primarily non-industrial and attracts our community activity. And so that's to include the geographic area that we've designated as our downtown or as our equivalent. So later in the slides, I'll show you a map that's a draft at the moment, but it shows you what our current designated downtown area looks like, and then also shows you what a mile from that area looks like geographically. So along with the bill including provisions about what we need to do, they also preempt us from doing certain things. So this is a list of the things that the bill specifically says the cities may not do. So we may not discourage the development by making requirements that would make permitting, siting, or construction impractical. We can't restrict the middle housing types, so those duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhomes to less than 2 floors. We're also not permitted to restrict middle housing to a floor area of less than 50%. So what a floor area ratio is, it's essentially a way of calculating lot coverage. It's a ratio of the area of the building on the site to the size of the lot. So we would be unable to restrict that to less than 50%. We're also not allowed to set restrictions, permitting, review processes that would be more restrictive than what we require currently of single-family homes in the same zoning district. So what this means that we can do is we can continue to enforce development standards in those zoning districts, including things like setbacks, height restrictions, lot coverage, things like that. We are still allowed to enforce, but only in the same way that we do for current single-family homes. We're also not allowed to require any owner occupancy of any of the units in the middle housing that's developed. We're also not permitted to make them comply with commercial building codes or to have fire sprinklers. And then that final point relating to parking, where we can't enforce our typical parking requirements, which is based on the number of bedrooms in each unit. The bill requires that we cannot require more than 1 off-street parking space per unit. So for a fourplex, that would be 4 spaces off street. So there's a couple of things that we're still allowed to do that the bill explicitly says that we can continue, or things that we can do in addition to what the bill provides, which obviously we're allowed to continue to permit single-family dwellings to exist in the areas that are zoned for them. We're also permitted to include additional types of middle housing that are not included to the bill. So they go from duplexes to fourplexes and townhomes. So this would mean if we were interested, we could even do things like 5 or 6 plexes, but we're not required to do so. And then their bill includes exclusions. So these are areas that would not apply to the provisions of middle housing, even if they were located in an area that would make them eligible. The ones of these that are really going to apply to us in the city of Tempe is that land that's not zoned for residential use. So anything that's got commercial zoning wouldn't apply here. And then as typical we see with these housing bills, it also excludes area within the vicinity of an airport. So for us, that's primarily Sky Harbor. And on our map in a future slide, we'll show you what that area looks like. So just some premise about where this came from and how we're doing as far as time. Like I said, this was approved last year by the governor in May, and the bill includes the provisions that we have to adopt an ordinance to comply with this by January 1st of next year. So as I mentioned, we're going to show you a map on the following slide that's going to show you what our current designated downtown or central business district for the purpose of this bill is. And extend that 1 mile radius out around it. So as you can see in the middle of that hatched area, that's currently what we're contemplating as applying as our central business district for the purpose of this bill. So that area generally goes from University Drive on the south up to Rio Salado and the Tempe Beach Park to the north. On the west side, that is the Union Pacific Railroad tracks. And to the east, that's the College Avenue alignment. So you can see that hatched area extending out. That's what 1 mile looks like from that area. So on the west, that extends to Priest, to the south to Broadway. To the east, that would be the alignment of Dorsey Road. And then to the north, generally about where you can kind of see it comes up to about the edge of the Rolling Hills Golf Course. So those areas in yellow shown on the map, that's where single family zoning exists today. So those would be the properties eligible for middle housing, those that are yellow and inside of the area. And then that kind of pink reddish shadow that you see extending from the west of us, that is of course the airport vicinity. So those areas would be excluded by virtue of being in the vicinity of a public airport as part of that bill. So looking forward as to where we're at with this. So of course, today, this is a public information meeting just to provide the information about what we'll be working on and give you a highlight of this particular bill. Following this, we're going to let the Arizona State Legislature have their session. They are currently looking at some amendments already to clarify and add to this particular section of state statute. One thing that they left out of this particular housing bill that was included in other ones is an exclusion for historic designated properties. So that could be neighborhoods or homes that are either on our Tempe local register or registered on the National Register of Historic Places. So currently that's not included as an exemption, but there is currently a House bill, that's House Bill 2719, that's being proposed that would add those as an exclusion to this middle housing. So we're going to wait it out and see if we need to change our ordinance to accommodate that. But following the end of their session in August, we'll be drafting our ordinance to comply with this middle housing bill and publishing that sometime in August. And along with that, we'll be scheduling another public meeting to go over the draft code and what it includes. And then we'll be moving to adoption hearings. So there will be a hearing from the Development Review Commission and then on to City Council adoption hearings, of which there will be 2. And that should happen in October or November so that we can have it adopted and in our books by January 1st of 2026. So with that, we'll open it up for some questions and discussion. And here's the contact information for the project team that we're currently working on this with.
All right, thank you, Jacob. And we were also joined by Ryan Levesque, who is our Deputy Community Development Director for Planning. So you'll see him answering some of the questions in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and read those that were answered because we are recording them as a meeting. That way, if anyone goes back and watches it, then they know questions that were asked and answered. So the first question, and then you guys can also expand, Jacob and Ryan, if you wanted to on those. So the first one asked, does this permit 3 stories? And the answer was, if you can build 3 stories within the allowed height of the district, typically 30 feet. Did you guys want to add anything else to that?
No, Ryan got it pretty well. So like I was saying earlier, we can still enforce the development standards that we have currently on the books for single family districts. In most single family zoning districts, there is a height restriction of 30 feet, which typically is a 2-story building, but it's happened before where somebody can accommodate a 3-story building in a 30-foot height. But also, worth mentioning is that the bill prohibits us from restricting it to less than 2 floors. It doesn't say anything about if we could restrict it for 3 or less. So that's something that we might be able to have a little say as part of this ordinance, that we could do that.
Okay, thank you. And just because the question was asked, yes, but you can come off mute and ask your questions in a minute. I'm just going to get through the ones that we had gone through in the chat. So again, if anyone comes back and watches the recording, they know what was already addressed. So then we'll come back and get those who want to come off mute. Was this voted on by the general public or passed internally by the state legislature? And Ryan noted it was passed by the state, and Jacob had the slide there with the date that it went into effect. And are there any efforts in place to undo this bill? And then Jacob did mention not to undo, but that there's current legislation looking to amend it. And so all of these, as Jacob referenced, are bills that happen at the state level. So the city does have to comply. And so if you need that in a minute here, I'll drop in the chat a link to the state legislature's website. You can follow bills. You can register to speak on them. As a resident, you are able to opine and give your opinion to your state legislators as well. Let's see. So then the next question, and Kendra, I know that maybe you want to speak to it as well, but she was asking clarification on the airport. Jacob, do you want to go back and maybe explain what the red in the map means?
So here we are. So the exclusion that's written in the state law is talking about the area within the vicinity of a public airport. So that's a statutorily defined area, and it's the boundaries at which the average day-night decibel level is 60. So what you're seeing there in that red area is where basically the average airport noise comes out to 60 decibels. That's the area that they define as being the excluded area. So even if it's yellow, single family zoned, and within the 1 mile buffer, if that red overlay goes over it, the provisions of the middle housing law wouldn't apply.
Can I kind of add on to that or ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
So when I was reading the actual bill, it said something like excluded from the airport area in cases in which it would cause issues. So I would hope in the city's ordinance that it would specifically say, yeah, just nothing at all in the red, because the way I interpreted what the House bill said, that it was more open to, well, cities can determine whether or not it would actually cause an issue. So just wanted to point that out, that for me, the House bill seemed a lot more open in terms of saying, well, only if it causes an issue. And like defining what would cause an issue is a little broad.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, Kendra, you're right. So what the language says on the bill is that it's any land within the territory, the vicinity of the airport, or to the extent that it would interfere with the airport's ability to comply. So it sounds like there might be a little room there. We'll look into that and see
Okay.
exactly what that means.
Well, that or is helpful. I read it as an and. So, okay, that's good. But I think that's important to define that very clearly because we already know we've had issues with people trying to build some crazy stuff in the line of the airport. So thank you.
Thanks.
And then just while we're on the map, the question was asked if it's 1 mile from the center or 1 mile from the edge, and was clarified it is from the edge. So the mile is from each of the boundaries all around it. And then last question I'm going to take that was put in the chat, then we'll go to some hands and then come back to the chat because the hand was before some of our next ones, is Jacob, can you share which of the neighborhoods are considered historic in that area?
Sure. Let me just pull up a map really quick that will display for us where those historic designations exist. Let's see if everyone can see that. So the neighborhoods that are outlined with the color, those are the ones that currently the entire neighborhood is a designated historic district. So that would be over here at University Park, as well as the Roosevelt Addition. And then this is the Tomlinson Estates and the Borden Homes. Going back to our map, those which are in that area, it's the University Heights and the Roosevelt Addition, which is already in that exclusion area of the airport anyway. And then the Tomlinson Estates and the Borden Homes are just outside of that 1 mile buffer. And this would also include, if the amendment that is written gets adopted to exclude historic designated properties, that would also extend to individual homes, which are either on the local or the national register as well.
Okay, thank you. So David, you had your hand raised, so we're going to come over to your question and then we'll come back to those in the chat.
Yeah, I think the central business district is very small. The downtown character area was much larger than that. The urban core master plan was probably 100 times larger than that. It doesn't include places like State Farm or Novus or ASU. So should we look at updating the central business district to actually include our businesses?
So David, the current boundary that we're showing here, this is an area that's already been defined in our zoning code as the Tempe City Center, and it's the area at which we allow our city center zoning to exist. So that's where it's coming from. So it's not necessarily a new area. The code or the bill, requires that we do whatever we've designated as our downtown. This is kind of the closest equivalent that we have on the books already. But certainly as part of the process of coming through and writing an ordinance for this, there's room for us to change what we're drawing there. But currently that right there in that area of College to the tracks, University to Rio Salado, is what's already been defined as kind of our city center where we use our downtown zoning.
I'm not sure what you understand by downtown zoning. Lots of these areas are 65 plus, and I mean, I just think we should include areas like State Farm, but I want to move on to my next question. So Tempe already has missing middle housing in the Riverside neighborhood. So the airport zone does not interfere with that, right?
That's right. So the areas that are not yellow, that you see in areas like specifically in the Riverside neighborhood, and also in the Wilson Art and Garden and Maple Ash, those places already have multifamily zoning. So depending on the size of their property and what multifamily zoning that they have, they already by right can do duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, depending on the density that they can do and the size of their lot. That's not going away.
Okay, so if the state does give a historic exemption, wouldn't that render this bill completely and totally ineffective? Because where would Tempe actually be increasing the housing supply?
So even with the exclusion of historic designated neighborhoods, there would still be included areas in this block between the tracks, Priest, University, and Broadway, as well as off of Broadway further east. So even if the neighborhood like University Heights is ultimately excluded because of its historic designation, there's still eligible single-family zoned properties within that 1 mile buffer.
Yeah, I think we really should look at trying to cut more red tape because I don't think it's very helpful to be too restrictive. Like if we have a small central business district and we exclude historic neighborhoods, then what will happen is the state is going to come back with more mandates, because you said the point is to increase the housing supply. So if Tempe doesn't actually deliver, then the state's going to keep coming back again and again and again until Tempe is capable of delivering. And based on our housing study, we're going to need thousands and thousands of more units. So to me, I really think we should be looking at even going beyond what the state is requiring to look at other neighborhoods outside of this district.
Okay,
Jacob.
yeah. Go ahead, Ryan.
If I could add into, I just also want to note that, this is being mandated by the state legislature, so we're required to implement this, and there are some overlaying of regulations or other prior Senate bills that are intended to increase the housing population, such as ADUs. So it's almost like a counterbalance act of, well, we just initiated accessory dwelling units that allow up to two, one attached, one detached already in these neighborhoods. And now we're being forced to apply this new category of duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes in this area when we really haven't even had a chance to implement the ADU provisions. So, there will be opportunities for other smaller dwelling unit additions to our housing community, but just not this provision as proposed.
I just want to make a final comment that, it's like the fact that the city of Tempe is dealing with multiple things at the state level doesn't change the fact that the state will keep coming back. So the more that the city delays, the more eager the state is going to be to come up with more regulations. So the idea is that we need to go faster to catch up to the state.
Thank you for your comments, David. So we're going to go back to the chat and then we'll come back, Kendra, to your hand. We had a few questions, comments put in the chat. Jana asked that we make available the list of legislators we handed out. We do have a Day at the Capitol that the city of Tempe sponsors. That happened in January. So I did put that in the chat as a PDF. If you can't access it, I will also email it out to our attendees today. And then also put the state legislative website in the chat for you. So kind of to your point, Ryan, question here, how will this complement the House bill on ADUs? Is there still the same restriction regarding the unit size if, for example, on a second story of a new build on top of the main floor?
Great question. So like Ryan kind of talked about a little bit, this bill of the middle housing and then the ADU bill are kind of running in tandem, but they're not exactly any overlap. So the ADU ordinance is going to be effective on any single family use. So there's more property that's eligible for that, and that's citywide. The thing about the ADU ordinance is that there still has to remain on the property one primary residence, which has to be at least 75, or the ADU has to be at least 75% or smaller of that footprint. So the ADU is more adding units to a property where a single family home exists. The middle housing is more of a development of multifamily. So 2 units, 3 units that could all be the same size. Not necessarily one is the primary and the others are accessory. So they're applying to both different properties in different areas with different zoning, and it's a different development type. So one couldn't, for example, come in and say, I want to build a duplex as per my middle housing allotment, and then add ADUs to the duplex, because that wouldn't meet the requirement of the ADU ordinance that you're a single family home. So the restrictions that we have right now for our ADU ordinance, those aren't changing. This is a separate ordinance with a separate purpose with different development.
Okay, Kendra, your comment was next on historic districts. I didn't know if you want to come off mute to ask that or comment, or I can read it either way.
Oh, just that, I've personally worked to try to designate my neighborhood as historic. We actually had quite a bit of interest in our 55 home development built in the 1950s. I went door to door, personally spoke with every single neighbor. I was working with John Southard. Unfortunately, something happened. He was unable to continue responding to my emails, and it just kind of dropped off the radar. And people in my neighborhood continue to ask me about this, but I've had no support from the city, so we can't get anywhere. And I just, somebody brought up the historic housing, seeming like they were interested in, protecting their neighborhood. The city does not make it easy. So that's all I was saying.
Okay, thanks, Kendra. And we can also get you in contact. We have a new historic preservation officer, Dr. Zachary Lechner.
Thank you.
And so we can
Get his contact information yesterday. I haven't had a chance to call him though.
Okay, you do know. Okay, great. I'm glad you have it then, because yeah, he is our new historic preservation officer and is really good. So let's see another comment here. No need to expand. Agree to keep central district as defined. And then the recording, I'll put the project website in the chat, but it's tempe.gov/proposed code changes. And the changes is plural, but we'll put that there. And then the recording, it takes not too long, but sometimes it can be up to a day to process to a format that we can post on our website. So as soon as we have that there, we will have that on you. And so next comment, again, was no thank you on expanding the central district. Based on the housing report to state legislature, we are on track. And that people live in these neighborhoods you're referring to and have for decades. They're their homes. So let's see. So here's a question. Under this, can someone tear down their single family home and build a fourplex? Can the inclusion area be more than 1 mile from the central business district?
To the first question, can you tear down a single family home and build a fourplex? Yes. That is the type of development that's contemplated through this bill. It could be a tear down, it could be modified building. But yes, that is one option that could, be something that comes out from this ordinance.
Hey, Jacob, could you clarify that as long as it meets the standards of the
Right, yeah,
district? So you might be limited based on your setbacks, lot coverage, on how many units you can put on your property.
That's right. And like we were mentioning earlier, so things like the setbacks, the height restrictions, those are going to come into play, but also the parking. So for a fourplex, having 4 off-street parking spaces is going to be in some lots a difficult thing to design around, but that's something that we still have the authority to require. So it's possible to do a tear down and build new, but like Ryan was saying, there's still development standards and they would still go through a review through the city community development office to make sure that they're compliant with those regulations. And then can the inclusion area be more than 1 mile from the central business district? We believe so. It does say, it doesn't really give that room for ambiguity in the language, but it would seem that if the intent is for the construction of more housing, then it seems likely that we would be able to include more than 1 mile.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Kendra, you still had your hand up. Did you want to ask another question?
Yeah, I have a couple. Thank you. One of mine I had already written down. Can the city just change what is designated as downtown? And we kind of got confirmation that yes, this could potentially just endlessly expand, which is a little unfortunate. I also just want to say I'm not against affordable housing. I am not against housing. I am, however, frustrated that this is the way the state is going about this. This isn't, until we regulate corporate housing buyouts, like affordable housing is not going to change. The overarching issue of why housing is not affordable is because regular people can't afford housing anymore. So now we're expanding this and we're saying, oh, great, we can build more housing. Who's going to be building that housing? It's not going to be your regular person. It's going to be more corporations building fourplexes and duplexes and all these things. I don't see how this solves that. Obviously, that's not my personal fight to fight, nor is it the city of Tempe, because this was a state introduced thing. But I do want to make it a point that, sorry, one second. That I hope the city takes this seriously and doesn't just go off the rails, because this isn't a solution. Just building more housing without anything else going on, that's not going to drop the prices of housing. We've already seen that. But anyway, that answered my question. this was a little ambiguous to me, but a question about now that we're kind of overarchingly designating these areas as multifamily in some way, do they still have to meet the R16 zoning requirements? Like specifically in that original list there, it said that the city cannot allow less than 50% lot coverage, but for R16, it's 45% lot coverage. So in that way, you are kind of turning it into multifamily rules. Like, I just don't even understand what the rules go by anymore. It seems like a single family housing zoning means nothing anymore where I live. So just curious, what parts of that zoning are changing? Because it's not just saying, yeah, you can build something that's a duplex. It's also changing what is allowed per the zoning itself.
Sure, Kendra, so we'll have to do a little bit of math to figure out what this implies for us, but floor area ratio is a different calculation than lot coverage. And we don't use floor area ratio in the city of Tempe. We
Okay.
use lot coverage, like you were mentioning, in a percentage. So a floor area ratio of 50% may or may not be something that is already less than the 45% that's typical in single family R16 zoning. We'll have to do the math and figure out what that looks like, but like we spoke earlier, the things like the height restrictions, the setbacks, those things are still going to apply. The only development standards that this essentially is waiving from single family zoning is going to be the density. So even things like the lot size and the like minimum lot dimensions are still applicable. It's really just that density calculation that's going to be preempted through the middle housing ordinance. And then with the lot coverage, we'll find out if there's implications for that. But a floor area ratio is a different thing, and we're not
Okay.
as familiar with it. We don't use that way of calculating, but we can provide more information on whether or not the 45% that we typically require is less than that. Because it kind of seems like maybe those 2 points from the bill might be mutually exclusive if you're not doing something more than what you would do for a single family, but it's also something that they restrict elsewhere in the bill. So we'll figure that out.
Okay, thank you. And then really the last question that I had right now was, I just want to ask, like, this is going to be the opposite of some other questions that were raised, but what is the city planning to do to kind of rein this in? Because to me, this looks like, again, just another like developer special. We're like I said before, who are the people that are actually going to be building these? It's not your neighbor. It's corporations buying housing, demolishing single family homes to build something larger and make money. So what is the city planning to do to prevent more corporate home buy up and like putting some restrictions stating, for example, no, we are keeping this as the central business district, because as we already discussed, it seems like it can just change at any time. And then this whole entire circle is now the central business district, and then it just expands and expands. So has anything concrete been discussed, or is this just the very beginning of what the ordinance from Tempe is going to be?
This is just the beginning, but the bill that this is coming from is very prescriptive. With other bills that came from the legislature relating to housing, we've had a little more wiggle room with the types of things that we've been able to do. This one doesn't really offer us many options in the language. There's not a lot of we may, right? It's all you shall or you shall not. So there's, in that regard, there's not a lot that we can do to try and mitigate. One thing that you mentioned about the area of that central business district, once we have that area identified in a capacity that's it's going to be the one that's in our ordinance, I don't imagine we would go back and modify it. As I was explaining to David, that's the area that we have our city center zoning allowed, and that's the definition of our city center area that's already in our zoning code. We don't we don't see us putting city center zoning anywhere outside of that area. So there would be no need to modify it for any other reason that might, you know, unintentionally impact what that area looks like. So
And I mean, there are neighborhoods literally right there. So I personally, actually, I don't know, I'm not shocked at almost anything anymore. But if you were to try to say, oh yeah, let's expand it further out, I mean, right at that boundary, that's legitimately, those are people's houses. So I would hope that the city wouldn't come and say, oh yeah, this is a central business district. All of this housing right here somehow is now part of the central business district. I know David was saying he wants to expand it to that State Farm area up there, which really would only expand the 1 mile thing further north and further east. But yeah, I would hope that the city would not just say, oh yeah, let's expand this further. This is all housing, but we're going to call it our central business district. That would be my main concern on that. And hopefully that doesn't happen. So thank you for listening.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kendra. We have some more in the chat and then we'll come back to other comments. I think then Jacob, you may have answered this, but it asks about lot coverage can be what, since they preclude the min and max of 50%. So I think maybe that got to what you're explaining.
Right. Yeah. So what Kendra was mentioning is that in R16 zoning, which is the more common single family zoning in the city of Tempe, we currently have a lot coverage percentage that's 45%. The bill had the language in there that we can't restrict floor area ratio to less than 50%. So being that those are two different ways of calculating lot coverage, we'll have to see, but the language of the bill allowing us to impose the development standards that we would normally do for single family would seem to suggest that we could continue with the 45% lot coverage.
Okay, and then just a comment agreeing with the previous comments on corporate housing. And then another comment and question. Seems like a field day for investors and developers and a handcuffing of long-term residents. Does the city have a position on the bill? And is anything being done to protect the integrity and identity of affected neighborhoods?
I'll talk about that a little bit, and then maybe Ryan might want to jump in, but we did want to see that addition of those exemptions for the historic neighborhoods, as that was something that we expected to see on this bill, and we're kind of surprised not to, being that it was included in all of the other housing related bills. So from that perspective, the new bill that's an amendment is one that we like more than, you know, maybe what was already there. As far as the middle housing bill initially, not as sure. Ryan, did you have anything on that?
Yeah, I think initially when we went through the review of this process, I think the concepts of middle housing were supported, but the very specifics and limited nature and descriptive of the targeting single family zone districts really wasn't a supported position from planning perspective, because it was targeting a lot of our older neighborhoods that don't have protections like with HOAs or CCNRs that could essentially deregulate some of these provisions in here. And yes, essentially it is converting single family districts to multifamily. And that was concerning from a historical perspective of some of our historic districts, historic properties that typically congregate within a 1 mile radius of the downtown area. So that was a concern, along with, you know, not really getting an opportunity, a chance to do a test and evaluate other provisions that were adopted by the state, like the ADU provisions. These neighborhoods are currently allowed to have up to 2 ADU units. Now they have a choice, you know, potentially pursue multifamily development or pursue ADU options. And it seemed a little counterintuitive with the balance of the two. And I know the middle housing bill is more about getting a certain type of middle housing to increase the supply of that, not necessarily to address affordable housing. ADU provisions are more about smaller housing types and making them more affordable in nature.
Thank you, Ryan. We will come back to the chat in a minute. David, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it's actually about what Ryan was just talking about, because it's important to point out that the state expects Tempe to build thousands of units based on our job growth. So before we even have a conversation about affordable housing, we have to make sure that we're meeting the demand, even if that income is 100,000 a year. So I think Tempe needs to stop promoting job growth. But for the time being, we can look at building duplex, we can build apartments, we can build high rises. But I think that the duplex are going to be less disruptive to the neighborhoods than apartments. And I want to reiterate that if Tempe is not able to deliver what the state expects, then chances are that the state will probably come back with something like a builder's remedy, which is basically automatic approval until you produce the units.
Thank you, David. And then the next question in the chat is, if setbacks and coverage are met, could someone build more than 4 units?
So no, not unless we were to adopt a version of this ordinance that allows more than a fourplex. The way that the bill language is we only have to allow for duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, and townhomes. So if someone were able to fit 5 units on there, unless our particular ordinance allowed for that type of middle housing, it would go beyond what the provisions of our ordinance would allow.
So to clarify the townhome provision, townhomes are essentially fee simple lots, ability to sell each unit separately. So someone could do a townhome project with up to the allotment of essentially like a fourplex. So 2, 3, or 4 townhome units. They just couldn't do more than 4.
Right.
Next question, if someone believes this will devalue their home, is there recourse at the state level regarding diminution of value?
Unfortunately, I think
Rules.
this will dramatically increase the value of these properties in this area, because now you're saying not only can you sell this today, you sell the property, you can only have one dwelling on the site. Now you can sell the property with the potential of adding more density on the site. So yeah, unfortunately, it's counterintuitive to the idea that this is going to diminish the value, but I can see people's concern that it's going to certainly change the characteristic of these neighborhoods, certainly.
Okay, and one of your fellow neighbors, Jana Lynn Granillo, is on, and she offered if anyone wants to work with her on legislative action. She's very active and can work with you. She put her contact info there for you. And then Kendra, I can read what you put there, or did you want to, I see your hand is still raised. Did you want to come off mute or?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I forgot to take away the hand raise. Yeah, I was just saying, to point out that we need more housing, we need more housing, we need more housing, but like we have all these apartments that have been built, like for example, the local, we know that many of those were just turned into short-term rentals. So it's not about providing housing for people that live and work here. It ends up being too unaffordable, or it's swooped up by corporations who then make money off of people, a lot of times as short-term rentals. So I just don't agree with the fact that build is going to solve the problem. And then I think it was Ryan that stated that, like exactly to my point. Build, and make all these changes of you can build more and you can build bigger and you can build more dense. He literally just said that it would raise the property values, which is the exact opposite of working towards creating affordable housing. I didn't even have to say it. It was just said right there. So, okay.
Thanks, Kendra.
Statement.
And then there's a comment that, yes, increases demand and value, resulting in higher priced housing instead of affordable. Question, townhomes, can cities deny lot splits to do 4 townhomes?
It does not seem like we would be able to. So as Ryan said, townhomes are when the individual homes that are sharing walls are on fee simple lots, usually with like a common area or tract that's managed by some sort of association through their CC&Rs. So being that this bill requires that we allow for townhomes, it would be an assumption that we would have to require the necessary processing to allow them to build the townhomes and subdivide the lots. So if it's within the number of units that would be allowed through the middle housing provision, then we would not be able to deny the lot split for it.
Okay, and then just comments. Oh, sorry. People are commenting on questions, so it's moving my screen here. Sorry. Doesn't accommodate families with children. There are so many studios and one bedroom. And then a separate comment, which are usually now luxury, not enough studios and one beds for working people. Another comment that half of Tempe are single. Separate comment, yes, single, because they're not adding units that support families. Question, can townhomes have ADUs?
Yes. So as a single family home on a single lot, a townhome is permitted to have an ADU. However, most townhomes in their covenants and restrictions prevent that. So it would depend on a case-by-case basis, but on the surface of the question, yes, a townhome is permitted ADUs.
Jacob, I think maybe in the case of the middle housing bill, allowing the townhomes, I don't think we would allow them to do both use of the middle housing provisions plus ADUs. Right, but you might have a situation where you have, existing single family or multifamily townhome project site that could have ADU components through other means and processing.
Thank you, Ryan. Let's see, here's another comment. I think this and the starter home bill currently at the legislature are great ideas. These types of neighborhoods have been historically proven to help create more inclusive communities. The central business district needs to be significantly expanded to include all of ASU and Nexus, I assume Novus, the city parcel sold or leased to Lincoln at Rio and Priest. I love Tempe and think we should make it possible for others to move here, including those that prefer to live within a neighborhood instead of only offering single-family detached and large apartment communities. We've already done this with several small townhome communities through Central Tempe and the Newtown microestates. No need to fear more. I find it a bit funny the Tempe progressive at last in their messaging, if not their legislation, has to follow behind the state legislature. And were there any other comments or questions? We do still have some time here. Jana Lynn, yeah, you're welcome to come off mute.
Thank you for that. In response to Patrick regarding the starter home legislation, I would look at the fine details on that. The idea of microhomes, City of Tempe already has microhomes and opportunities for that. But if you look at the details of the legislation, it is quite disturbing. And they're talking about 1,500 square foot lots, not houses, lots. And there's a lot of other stuff in there that dictates what towns should do, over 70,000 again. So I just offer people to really look at the details of what's in the legislation. And I also put my email in there, meyerparktempe@gmail, if you'd like to reach out to me regarding some of the activities I'm doing as a neighborhood advocate at the state legislature. Thank you.
Thanks, Jana Lynn. I'm not seeing any other comments or hands. Jacob, I know had shared, maybe if you put our contact information up there, if questions come up. And again, just some of the next steps will be, we have an in-person meeting tonight at the library at 6 p.m. It'll be the same information, but you're also welcome to join us there. And then also maybe Jacob review next steps and we can close out.
Sure. Yep. So as we covered a little earlier, we're going to be taking a little break from public involvement on this one just to wait and see what happens with any amendments that come from this bill. And then you can look forward to sometime in August when we will come back with a version of our ordinance to accommodate this statute, and then some public meeting opportunities to talk more about the details of that ordinance before it goes through the adoption hearing process.
All right, thank you all again for attending. We appreciate your time today.
Thank you all for your comments and input. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.